And we are recording. Hi, Adam. So happy to have you.
Hi.
So what we'll start with is kind of a brief background about yourself, how you kind of got into this field, your education, current career. And I think this will be really interesting because not a lot of students really know about human experience or human factors. So awesome.
Yeah, so my background, I went to UCSD and I started in mechanical engineering, actually. So I did that for about a year and a half before I realized I enjoyed my psychology classes more. And so I switched over at that point. And at that point, I was going to be a therapist. Marriage and family therapy was my plan. Graduated and I took a year off, and in that time researching where I wanted to go to grad school, I was basically contacted about a job in human factors, which was a thing I was not familiar with. And so did some research, found out that basically I could do design, which is what I wanted to do with mechanical engineering, and I could do that with a psychology degree. So I went, shifted my plans at that point, started researching programs, and ended up at UConn, which is where I ended up getting a master's in IO psychology. And there was a focus on human factors in that program with my advisor. So
That's awesome.
yeah, so that's the education. And then as far as work, what I do day to day is I do a lot of research with users of products, and then I'll go and I will design solutions to problems we identify, and I'll test those with users again, and iterate until we get to a solution that kind of solves their problem and also meets the business needs.
Wow, that's so cool. What an interesting switch from marriage and family therapy to human factors. Well, yeah. I guess mechanical to marriage and family and then human factors. So what kind of shifted that interest? Was it just the job offer that kind of shifted you away from marriage and family therapy?
Well, it was that. It was also combined with my landlady at the time was also a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and I had some conversations with her wherein she had taken some of the shine off, I guess, of what I had pictured it would be. So she was already causing me to question, I think, at that point, what I thought I wanted to do. And then when I found out I could do what I originally wanted to do, with a psych degree, that was really what shifted it.
That's so cool. So what made it really interesting to you?
So I think what I love about my job and why I get excited to do it every day is it's all about solving problems, right? And so you identify those problems again through research with users. Sometimes they're business problems, like how do we make money with the assets we have, with the technology we have. And then you combine those things and you design solutions and you test them with users and you get really positive feedback when you do a good job. And I think that's really what I love about it, is the problem solving.
Awesome. Which is kind of like marriage and family therapy. You're still working with people to kind of solve this overarching problem and with efficiency. That's so cool. So how does it specifically utilize psychology?
So where the psychology comes in is really in understanding people and their limitations and their capabilities, right? And so there's a lot of things we have to consider. And some of it is, how people work in teams, how people work in systems, those sorts of things. That's really kind of the IO side of it. Yeah. Some of it is, cognitive psychology and sensation and perception, right? So, how can people perceive this screen? How do they understand the structure? How do they understand which pieces relate to which other pieces? So there's a lot of, visual hierarchy and stuff in that. Yeah, I mean, it's really, I think that's really where the psychology comes in.
That's so cool. Is there anything specific that human factors psychologist has really that we would all know of and use today? Does that kind of make sense?
Could you be more specific?
Yeah, so I heard something like the backspace button on our computers was something that like someone kind of involved in human factors came up with in terms of like where our fingers could reach. Um,
Yep. Yeah, so a lot of that stuff. So human factors is really kind of the basis for a lot of what you see today in user experience, which is kind of a more modern term. But human factors originated many years ago, and it's really more in things like aviation and you know, nuclear reactor control rooms and things like that. And it really was much more about so ergonomics in the case of aviation, right? Like how, what is the median reach for different people and things like that, and how do we keep people from injuring themselves? How do we make sure they're optimized? But then there's also a lot of research into like situational awareness and things like that for particularly, again, aviation. And it was really about like preventing catastrophes and errors, right? And so that's really the basis of a lot of it. And then, there was a recognition through time that, it's not just about preventing errors, but it's also about improving the experience for users, right? And so you can use these same techniques for, companies like Facebook and Apple to, make products that people love.
Absolutely. Sorry, there's someone doing yard work, so I'm going to close my window.
No worries.
They've been doing it every day recently. Oh, well. Okay, sorry. That is really awesome. So you mentioned research a couple times here. Were you involved in research through undergrad, or how did that look in your master's program? And is that a necessary kind of relevant experience to have when applying?
I think it's certainly relevant. I don't know if I would say necessary. And so this is where I'll tell you that there's a few flavors of what I do. So at my current company, we actually have dedicated UX researchers, right? And so those people are responsible for making sure we go out and we do what we call discovery research. And so that's where you go to a customer's site and you kind of job shadow them. You kind of see what their environment looks like. You look at, the types of stuff they have on their desks. Are they using a small monitor, a big monitor? Are they working from their mobile phone? All of that. And that's really just to understand the users and what they might need. And then you take that and where the company might fit in and where the company might drive value for the users and for the company, right? And so those UX researchers, obviously a background in research is very helpful for that. On the design side, which is really more where I am, although I've straddled the line throughout my career, I can do both. The design side, I would say, having done research and understanding the value of research is important. I wouldn't say it's necessary. There's a couple of paths actually that people can take into user experience. So now there's actually more programs kind of focused on product design and things like that. But when I was going to school, it was more rare to actually have programs focused on this. And so people would come at it either from a psychology or cognitive science background, or they would come at it from a graphic design arts background, right? And from both of those paths, you kind of need to pick up some of the other, right? In order to be really effective.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so if you want to do design, I would say research is nice to have, not necessary. If you want to do research, absolutely.
Absolutely. Cool. What was the structure of your master's program kind of? And like what made you, a top candidate, I guess?
That's a good question. I'm not sure what made me a top candidate. I guess I was always pretty good in school. So I like to think that made me a top candidate. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I had targeted a few different programs, and actually I was in a PhD program. I decided I didn't want to proceed with PhD once I got the master's.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had applied to a few really targeted. I had applied to some master's programs as well. But yeah, just really liked it when I went out to visit the school, and Yeah, I don't know. I mean, as far as a top candidate, I think it was just, yeah, I worked really hard, obviously.
Yeah, of course. Awesome. So cool. And did you have to do anything? So like, I know kind of typical masters, you apply to work under somebody and then you do a
Hmm.
thesis. Was that something that was required as well?
Yes, yeah. So I had identified an advisor who was doing work with teams and with human factors type stuff.
Awesome.
And so I was admitted to be, his student. And then, yeah, otherwise, standard coursework for the master's. So I had several courses in the organizational side as well as the industrial side, which is more of the human factors side.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, courses in, performance appraisal and selection and all sorts of things like that, questionnaire development. And then the thesis, I did basically it was a study where I brought people in and they were to do a team task, but they were in different rooms and they were communicating with varied levels of communication delay. And
Huh.
so I was looking at the impacts of communication delay on team task performance.
That is so cool because like embodied cognition is like a huge part of that. You use like the mouth, the facial
Hmm.
expressions, all of that. So when there's a delay, especially with older people, they have a really difficult time. Kind of,
Yeah.
that's so cool. I find that kind of stuff so interesting. Awesome. So uh, another question on top of research not so necessary, but good to be a good consumer or
Hmm.
understand research. And then what about computers? um,
Yeah. I mean, and I guess I would probably give this as general advice to anybody, but computers absolutely necessary in my job. So I'm on a computer all day long. Now I'm on Zoom calls all day long, but um, yeah, I mean, all of the design tools you're going to use. Now, I mean, that's not to say there's a lot of my job that's done off of a computer. So you do workshops with people and you're doing whiteboarding and post-it notes and all sorts of ideation stuff. But when it gets down to actually like pushing pixels on a screen,
yeah.
you're on a computer. That's not to say you need to be a software developer, right? But you need to be able to be very comfortable with using a computer for sure.
So like as an undergrad, taking some computer science type courses would probably be beneficial.
It could be. Again, um, I think knowing, how would I put this? Knowing the materials you're working with is always valuable for a designer, right? And so the more you understand about the capabilities and limitations of code, of software,
Yeah,
the better you're able to work with engineers to solve problems.
absolutely. That's so awesome. So what kind of, so we kind of touched on research, also a little bit on the education, computers. What kind of training have you specifically had or do you need to be successful?
Yeah, I mean, the more, so this is the difficult thing. And whenever anybody asks me, how do I break into UX? The benefit for people who are still in college is that you have time to get internships, to get real world experience doing this stuff, because it's very difficult for some people later in their career to make the transition,
Yeah,
right? As with many jobs, there are entry level jobs, but a lot of people are looking for 3 to 5 years experience, right? And
yeah,
so, the more you can get your foot in the door with an internship, that's I would say the number one way that you can break into this field, and it is a very desirable field.
yeah.
Um, as far as specific training, like I said, there are programs that are more focused on this, um, but for me, it was really about networking, getting my first internship, and building from there. So.
Awesome. Absolutely. And is this kind of, so there are some jobs more so, or career paths more so than others, where once you get an internship, they will actually pay you to go get a higher level of education. Is this something that might be common in your field? That's kind of a random question, but
Um, I can't say that I've necessarily heard of that.
okay.
I will say that we the internships that you're going to get are typically paid.
Yeah.
So you are paid as an employee. And at least at ServiceNow, there's a pretty good conversion rate, right? So if you come in as an intern and you do a really good job and there's a role, we convert the interns at a pretty high rate.
That's so cool. Awesome. Are there any, well, we'll get into that later. I'm going to make a note to ask. Let's see. Intern. Let's see. Okay. So now getting more into the career aspects of user experience. As one student asked, is user experience similar to customer satisfaction?
They're related in that, customer satisfaction, I would say, is a larger kind of concept, right? So if I call in and I have an issue, somebody on the phone might help me deal with that, and I might be a satisfied customer. User experience or product design is really about making sure they're satisfied with the tools that we're giving them, right? And so we do measure things like that, like with a net promoter score, like how, scale of 1 to 10, how would you recommend this to a friend?
Yeah.
But yeah, customer satisfaction is more of an outcome, I would say.
Of user experience?
Of designing a good user experience.
Yeah. Awesome. And then how or what benefits does user experience give like corporations in the overall workplace? I know we kind of touched on that here and there, but
yeah, the value obviously for a business is, as I said, customer satisfaction. If your customers love using your product, they will use it more. Specifically for ServiceNow, our strategy a lot of the time is to get our foot in the door with one type of product and then expand, right? So you add on more types of products because they're so satisfied with what we've delivered, right? And so that's really what it's about: customer retention, and it's about growth, right? So you make products that people really want to use because they're beautiful and they look like they work really well, and then you keep them using them because they love them.
Awesome. So. That's so cool. And I saw that you work with some actually big corporations, like I can't think of the names. Was Toshiba?
So ServiceNow is, there's all sorts of companies that are our customers. So Intuit, Disney, yeah. Disney Plus is using our customer service management. What are some other, a lot of universities, a lot of big companies.
So cool. Yeah, I stalked your LinkedIn a little bit. Don't judge me. So let's see. What are your favorite? So there's so many like different things you get to work on and do within this kind of field. Do you have like favorite projects you like to work
on? It's interesting. So I've jumped around to a lot of different industries. So I've worked in biotech, I've worked in financial tech, I've worked in telecommunications, mobile phones, and now enterprise software. But it's less about the product that I'm working on and more about the, getting into the problems, and understanding new problems to solve and figuring out how to solve those. That's really what gets me energized to do this job.
So cool. Do you think there's going to be a huge pickup or need with our current kind of situation with COVID-19?
It's interesting. I think definitely the need for more remote collaboration and more remote communication stuff is going to be more evident. I think there's a lot of companies that kind of already realized that. ServiceNow, I think, is actually well positioned to benefit out of the other side of this. But I think, yeah, it's really interesting to see what will change from a design and product perspective, as well as what will change from a societal perspective.
Absolutely.
I'm really interested to see how this all pans out.
Me too. Our Dr. Kath I was talking with was saying that some of her new research, especially with the COVID-19, they were going to look at people who worked remotely versus people who usually work person to person. Mm-hmm. And now that everyone has to work remotely, they're going to now look at kind of how someone who didn't used to work remotely is being able to do this versus people who always did, and how like that, how those groups kind of compare. And it's going to be really interesting to kind of find all that out. Yeah. So let's see, what is probably one of the most difficult parts of your job?
Difficult is sometimes the compromises that have to be made, right? So there's an ideal design that you want to ship, and then there's the reality of timelines and of technology. So I think, I mean, it's also sometimes the most rewarding part of the job, but, you know, working with engineers to actually build the product and the trade-offs you have to make, right? So yeah, we can do 100 things, but it's going to take us this long. And so what are the 5 most important? And so working with engineering, with product managers to kind of prioritize and build, it's difficult, but rewarding.
Awesome. Absolutely. And then let's see, are there some skills that are really, so top like 5 or 3, let's say 3 skills that you think are really necessary to have for someone interested in user experience? And then were there any skills you didn't really expect to need, but that have been pretty relevant?
I think the top skills, so I think collaboration is really important, right? You know, most designers are not building and shipping the product themselves, right? So again, you have to be able to work with and compromise with product managers and with engineers and with executive stakeholders sometimes to get the product out there, right? So collaboration is key. And I honestly, I think that like the ability to work with people is really key. I think some level of design skills, you know, is definitely a must. But it's something that I personally have developed mostly on the job. Like I don't have any background in graphic design, you know, but I don't know, there has to be some level of dissatisfaction with things that don't work right too. I mean, I think it's almost like a driving force that you have to want to make things better, right? And so even before I got into this field, like frustrations with technology that was poorly designed are just things that like I can't help but notice. Like it just frustrates me. Like, why did somebody do it this way? So I think those are all things. As far as skills I didn't know I would need, it's been so long. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what my expectations versus reality, what that gap was.
Yeah. That was a hard question, but I found it interesting, so I've been asking everybody. Also, what I wrote down earlier, and I didn't want to forget, is are there any specific places that would take interns in San Diego that you would recommend for students to look into?
Yeah, so I think there's probably quite a few, but they're definitely the larger employers. So ServiceNow is a big employer. Intuit is another big one. Qualcomm, HP. Up in Carlsbad, we have Walmart Labs. So those are big names that are standing out. Sony is still up in Rancho Bernardo. Mm-hmm. Those are the big ones I can think of. And then there's other kind of growing companies that I don't know if they have like established internship programs, but definitely lots of smaller companies and startups as well. Less likely to get an internship at one of those, but you know, depending on, you know, what you can show, you may be able to get a job there as well.
Cool. And is there anything that would make someone competitive? Like if they did, like students wanted to apply to the internship, do they need their BA now, or can that be something like they do welder?
No, I think a lot of our programs are people who are like working towards a degree. And so, yeah, I mean, if you can, the thing that would be useful to show would be if you've done any kind of projects or even like a personal, one thing that you can do if you haven't done any projects in school is like take something like some app or some website and do like a breakdown of it, and say like you could even do a project where you go talk to users of that product or service and you interview them and you figure out what their needs are, and you like can propose a redesign essentially, right? And like if you can kind of put that together in a story and say this is how I approach design and how I do things, those are the kinds of things that typically people are going to be looking for.
That's so cool. Let's see. Is there anything else you think students should really know about this field, or kind of advice that you might have?
I mean, I'm biased, obviously, but I think it's amazing. I love what I do. I can't imagine myself doing anything else. Yeah, advice. Learn more about it, network, find people that do this. I'm happy to be a resource if anybody wants to reach out to me. And yeah, just, figure out how you can tailor your own path into it. And the earlier, the better if you're interested. So.
Yes. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I think that's kind of, unless you have any last minute things you'd like to add.
No, I think that's good.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I know students will really appreciate it, and I appreciate it. So stay safe.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You too.
Bye.
All right. Bye.
Oops. There we go.